At dinner, my mom announced, "Your sister's moving into your place. She needs space, and you owe family." My sister just smirked. "Try not to touch my stuff." I just smiled. They had no clue I'd moved out last week and severed the lease in my name. I, 32M, sat at my parents' dining table, fork halfway to my mouth, when my mother dropped the bomb that would change everything. She announced with that matter-of-fact tone she used when discussing grocery lists that my sister would be moving into my apartment. According to her, my sister needed space, and I owed it to family to help out. The mashed potatoes suddenly tasted like cardboard as I processed her words. My sister, sitting across from me, had that familiar smirk plastered across her face. She told me not to touch her stuff when she moved in, like I was some kind of child who couldn't be trusted around her precious belongings. I just smiled back at them both. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. See, what my loving family didn't know was that I'd moved out of that apartment exactly 1 week ago. More importantly, I'd severed the lease that was entirely in my name. The apartment they were so generously giving away, it no longer existed as far as I was concerned. But let me back up and explain how we got here, because this story starts long before that dinner conversation. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While my sister partied through college on my parents' dime, I worked 2 jobs to pay for my education. When she dropped out junior year to pursue her dream of becoming an influencer, I was finishing my engineering degree with honors. When she moved back home at 25 because her latest get-rich-quick scheme failed, I was already established in my career and living independently. The pattern was always the same. My sister would create chaos, and somehow I'd be expected to clean it up. Need money for rent? Ask your brother. Car broke down. Your brother will help. Want to borrow something expensive? Your brother won't mind. My parents enabled every bit of it. They'd guilt me with speeches about family loyalty and how I was the successful one, so I should help out. They never asked what I wanted or needed. It was always about what I could provide for everyone else. The apartment situation had been brewing for months. My sister had been living with some guy she met at a coffee shop, playing house in his downtown loft. Apparently, things went south when she discovered he was married. The wife showed up one day, and my sister found herself homeless with nowhere to go except back to our parents' house. But here's the thing about my parents' house. It's small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and my sister's idea of personal space extends to claiming the entire living room as her domain. Within a week of her return, my parents were calling me daily, dropping hints about how cramped things were getting. The hints became suggestions. The suggestions became requests. The requests became demands. My mother started with the subtle approach, mentioning during our weekly phone calls how my sister was struggling to find her footing. She'd sigh dramatically and talk about how nice it would be if my sister had a quiet place to figure things out. When I didn't take the bait, she escalated. My father joined the campaign, using his disappointed voice to explain how families should stick together. He reminded me of all the times they'd helped me growing up, conveniently forgetting that I'd been working and contributing to household expenses since I was 16. But it was my sister who really pushed me over the edge. She started showing up at my apartment unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given my parents for emergencies. She'd raid my refrigerator, use my Netflix account, and leave messes for me to clean up. When I confronted her about it, she laughed and said she was just getting comfortable with the place since she'd be living there soon. That's when I realized they'd already decided among themselves. This wasn't a request or even a demand. It was a done deal in their minds. They were just waiting for the right moment to inform me of their decision. The final straw came 3 weeks before that dinner. I came home from a particularly brutal day at work to find my sister had thrown a party in my apartment. There were strangers drinking my alcohol, eating my food, and one couple was making out on my couch. My sister acted like I was the rude one for asking everyone to leave. She told me I needed to lighten up and that this was good practice for when she moved in permanently. She said I'd have to get used to sharing my space because family comes first. Then she had the audacity to ask me to sleep on the couch that night because she'd promised her friend could crash in my bed. I said no, obviously. But as I watched her roll her eyes and mutter about how selfish I was being, something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive way, more like a switch flipping. I suddenly saw the situation with perfect clarity. They were never going to stop. My parents would keep enabling her, and my sister would keep taking advantage of everyone around her. I could either spend the rest of my life being their safety net, or I could remove myself from the equation entirely. That night, I started planning my exit strategy. The first step was finding a new place. I'd been saving money for years, partly because I'm naturally frugal and partly because I'd been planning to buy a house eventually. I had enough for a down payment, and then some. Within 3 days, I found a perfect townhouse in a neighborhood 20 minutes away from my old apartment. The seller was motivated, and I was pre-approved for the mortgage. We closed in record time. By the end of the week, I was a homeowner, and my family had no idea. Moving out was the tricky part. I couldn't do it all at once without raising suspicions, so I started slowly. Every day after work, I'd take a few boxes to my new place. I told my parents I was decluttering and donating things to charity. They were so focused on their own plans that they didn't question it. I saved the furniture for last, hiring movers for a Saturday when I knew my family would be busy. My parents had their weekly grocery shopping routine, and my sister never got up before noon on weekends. By the time anyone might have noticed, my old apartment was completely empty. The hardest part was dealing with the lease. I'd been a model tenant for 3 years, always paying on time and taking care of the place. When I explained my situation to the landlord, that I was buying a house and needed to break the lease early, he was surprisingly understanding. He even waived the penalty fee since he had a waiting list of potential tenants. I gave him my 30-day notice, and he had someone new lined up within a week. The lease officially ended the day before that family dinner. But I wasn't done yet. I also changed my address with the post office, updated my information with my bank and credit cards, and made sure nothing connected to me would lead back to that apartment. I even had my utilities transferred to my new place and made sure the old accounts were closed. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone or create drama. I was just removing myself from a situation that had become toxic. If they wanted to give away an apartment, they were welcome to do so. They just couldn't give away mine. Sitting at that dinner table, watching my mother make her announcement while my sister smirked at me, I felt a strange sense of peace. They were so confident in their plan, so sure that I'd just roll over and accept their decision like I always had before. My mother explained that my sister needed space to get back on her feet and that it was only temporary. She said I was the only one in the family who could help, and that's what family does for each other. She made it sound like I'd be selfish and cruel to refuse. My sister chimed in with her comment about not touching her stuff, and I could see she was already mentally redecorating my apartment. She probably had plans to throw parties and bring guys over, treating the place like her personal playground. I asked when exactly this move was supposed to happen, keeping my voice casual and curious. My mother said they were thinking next weekend would be perfect. My sister added that she'd already started packing and couldn't wait to have her own space again. I nodded thoughtfully and told them that sounded like a plan. I said I'd make sure everything was ready for her. The relief on my mother's face was almost comical. She'd clearly been prepared for an argument. We finished dinner with my parents discussing logistics and my sister talking about all the changes she wanted to make to the apartment. She mentioned wanting to paint the bedroom a different color and maybe rearrange the furniture to better suit her needs. I just smiled and made encouraging noises. After dinner, I helped clean up like always, then hugged everyone goodbye. My sister reminded me again not to touch her stuff when she moved in, and I assured her I wouldn't dream of it. I drove home to my new townhouse, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited. Update 1. The call came exactly when I expected it, Saturday morning at 8 a.m. My sister's voice was shrill with panic as she demanded to know where all my furniture had gone. She was standing in an empty apartment, she said, and nothing made sense. I calmly explained that I'd moved out the previous week and that the lease had been terminated. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by her screaming that I couldn't do this to her. She said she had nowhere else to go and that I was ruining her life. I reminded her that the apartment had always been mine, leased in my name and paid for with my money. I'd never agreed to let her move in. That decision had been made for me without my input. Since I no longer lived there, the point was moot anyway. She hung up on me, but my phone started ringing again immediately. This time it was my mother, and she was furious. She accused me of being spiteful and vindictive, of deliberately sabotaging my sister's plans out of jealousy. She said I was tearing the family apart over something petty. I let her vent for a few minutes, then calmly asked her when exactly I had agreed to let my sister move into my apartment. She sputtered that it had been decided at dinner, but I pointed out that she'd made an announcement, not a request. She'd told me what was going to happen, not asked if I was willing to make it happen. My father got on the phone next, using his disappointed voice to tell me how selfish I was being. He said family was supposed to support each other, and I was abandoning my sister in her time of need. He reminded me of all the sacrifices they'd made for me growing up. I listened patiently, then asked him to name one specific sacrifice they'd made for me that they hadn't also made for my sister. I reminded him that I'd been working since I was 16, contributing to household expenses and paying for my own education. I asked him what exactly I owed the family that I hadn't already given. He couldn't answer that question, so he fell back on guilt trips about how disappointed they were in me. He said they'd raised me better than this, and that I was being cruel to my sister. I told them both that I wasn't being cruel. I was being practical. I'd bought a house and moved on with my life. If they wanted to help my sister find housing, they were welcome to do so, but it wouldn't be in an apartment I no longer had access to. My mother demanded to know where I was living now, but I deflected the question. I said I was settled somewhere safe and comfortable, and that was all they needed to know. I could hear my sister in the background, still ranting about how I'd ruined everything. The calls continued throughout the day. My sister tried guilt, anger, and even fake tears. My parents alternated between disappointment and fury. They all seemed to think that if they just found the right combination of emotional manipulation, I'd magically produce a solution to their problem. But I'd learned something important over the past few weeks. Their problems weren't automatically my problems. My sister's housing situation was something she needed to figure out for herself, just like every other adult in the world. By Sunday, the calls had stopped. I assumed they'd either found another solution or given up trying to change my mind. I was wrong. Update 2. Monday evening, I came home from work to find my entire family sitting on my front porch. They'd somehow tracked down my new address, and they were not happy about it. My mother stood up as I approached, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She demanded to know how I could afford a house when I'd been claiming I couldn't help my sister. She said I'd been lying to them about my financial situation and that I clearly had more than enough space to help family. My sister was crying. Real tears this time, not the fake ones from our phone conversations. She said she'd been sleeping on our parents' couch for 3 days and that her back was killing her. She begged me to let her stay in one of my spare bedrooms, just until she could find something else. My father tried the reasonable approach, suggesting we all sit down and work out a compromise. He said families should be able to solve problems together, and there had to be a way to make this work for everyone. I looked at the three of them, sitting on my porch like refugees, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to make me sad about how we'd gotten to this point. I told them they needed to leave. This was my home, and they weren't welcome here. My mother gasped like I'd slapped her, and my sister's crying intensified. My father asked how I could be so heartless toward my own family. I explained that I'd tried for years to maintain a relationship with them, but it had always been one-sided. They only contacted me when they needed something, and they'd never once asked what I needed or wanted. I'd been treated like a resource to be exploited rather than a person with my own life and goals. My sister stood up and accused me of being bitter and jealous of her. She said I'd always resented her for being more social and outgoing, and now I was punishing her for it. She said I was pathetic and that she was embarrassed to be related to me. That's when something interesting happened. Instead of feeling hurt or angry, I felt nothing. Her words bounced off me like rain off a windshield. I realized that her opinion of me simply didn't matter anymore. I told them again to leave, and this time I meant it. I said that if they didn't go voluntarily, I'd call the police and have them removed for trespassing. My mother started to argue, but my father put a hand on her arm and shook his head. As they walked back to their car, my sister turned around and screamed that I was dead to her. She said she never wanted to see me again and that I was no longer her brother. My parents looked devastated, but they didn't try to defend me or calm her down. I watched them drive away, then went inside and poured myself another glass of wine. I should have felt terrible. I'd just essentially cut ties with my entire family. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Update 3. It's been 6 months since that confrontation on my porch, and my life has changed in ways I never expected. The silence from my family was deafening at first, but gradually I began to appreciate the peace. No more guilt-laden phone calls about family obligations. No more surprise visits from my sister treating my home like her personal storage unit. No more being voluntold to help with whatever crisis had emerged that week. I threw myself into making my new house truly mine. I painted the walls colors I actually liked, bought furniture that suited my taste, and created spaces that reflected my personality. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself. The loneliness hit around month 3. Holidays were particularly difficult. I'd spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas with my family for 32 years. But I found ways to cope. I volunteered at a local shelter, started taking cooking classes, and even began dating again. That's actually how I found out what happened to my sister. I was at a coffee shop with someone I'd met through a hiking group when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 women were talking about a mutual friend who'd been evicted from her apartment for throwing parties and disturbing the neighbors. The description was unmistakably my sister. Apparently, she'd managed to find a place to live, probably with my parents' help, but had been kicked out within 3 months for the same behavior that had gotten her in trouble before. I felt a brief pang of something that might have been concern, but it passed quickly. She was an adult, and these were the consequences of her choices. I wasn't responsible for fixing her problems anymore. Around month 4, I got a text from my mother. It was brief and to the point. My sister was in the hospital after a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but she was asking for me. I stared at that message for a long time, waiting to feel something. Guilt, worry, love, anything that would compel me to rush to her side. But there was nothing. The connection that had once bound us together had been severed so completely that even genuine crisis couldn't restore it. I texted back that I hoped she recovered quickly, but I wouldn't be visiting. My mother's response was a single word: heartless. Maybe I was. Or maybe I just finally learned the difference between being heartless and having boundaries. The real test came last month when my father showed up at my office. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. He said my mother was sick, something with her heart, and that the stress of our family situation was making it worse. He didn't ask me to come home or reconcile with my sister. He just wanted me to know that my absence was hurting people I used to care about. He said he understood why I'd made the choices I had, but he hoped I'd consider whether the cost was worth it. I told him I was sorry to hear about my mother's health, and I meant it. But I also told him that I couldn't be responsible for managing everyone else's emotions anymore. If my mother was stressed about our family situation, that was something she and my sister needed to address through their own choices and actions. He nodded sadly and left without another word. I haven't heard from any of them since. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did, if I miss my family or wish I'd handled things differently. The honest answer is complicated. Do I miss the idea of having a close, supportive family? Absolutely. Do I miss the reality of what my family actually was? Not for a second. I've learned that blood relation doesn't automatically create obligation. That love without respect isn't really love at all. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who consistently treat you poorly, even if those people are family. My sister probably still tells people I'm heartless and selfish. My parents probably still think I abandoned them in their time of need. They're entitled to their opinions, but they don't get to dictate my reality anymore. I have a good life now. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I have hobbies and interests that bring me joy. I have a home that's truly mine, where I'm never made to feel like a guest or an inconvenience. Most importantly, I have peace. The constant anxiety of waiting for the next family crisis has been replaced by a calm certainty that whatever problems arise, they're not automatically mine to solve. That dinner conversation feels like it happened to someone else now. The person who sat at that table, smiling while his family made plans for his life without his input, was trapped in a cycle of obligation and guilt that had defined his entire existence. The person I am now understands that family isn't about what you owe each other. It's about what you choose to give freely. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even if that someone is your sister. I don't know what the future holds for my family. I hope my mother's health improves and that my sister eventually learns to take responsibility for her own life. But those outcomes aren't my responsibility anymore. I made my choice that night when I severed the lease and moved out. I chose myself, my peace, and my future over the comfortable dysfunction of family obligation. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one. And if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing.